So, we've talked about epistemology, and we've discussed some of the peculiarities of how science knows what it knows. I want to turn our attention now to just how much we know. How much new knowledge has science generated? It turns out that this is a really important question with broad and practical implications for knowledge storage, communication, and computational logistics. It also turns out to be an incredibly difficult question to answer, depending critically on the assumptions you make, the kinds of information storage you consider, and the ways you try to account for duplicate information. One of the best estimates I found was published back in 2011 by two researchers from UCLA. They estimated the size of the human body of knowledge by considering both analog and digital technologies that were in use between 1986 and 2007. They also did some clever mathematical tricks to try to account for redundant information. By their estimate, in 1986, there was approximately 2.6 exabytes of human knowledge. That's the number 26, followed by 17 zeros. That's a hard number to wrap your head around. Another way to think of it is how much physical space would all that data take if you stored it all on CD-ROMs stacked on top of one another. Now, most of you probably never actually used a CD-ROM, so this analogy is a bit dated. However, they're thin, only 1.2 millimeters thick, less than 47/100ths of an inch. If you saved all of the information humans had generated by 1986 on CD-ROMs, you would have a stack that rose 3,032 miles above the Earth's surface. That's astounding. So, how high was that stack in 2007, the last year for which they collected data? 298,625 miles. To put that into some perspective, that's a stack that would reach from the surface of the Earth to the Moon and a quarter of the way back. That's mind-boggling. Not only does this give you some sense of just how effective science has been in generating new knowledge, it should also give you an idea of just how rapidly the body of human knowledge has grown. In just 21 years, from 1986 to 2007, the knowledge humans had generated grew by a factor of nearly 100. Just imagine how much larger it is now. This is a remarkable accomplishment, something we as a species ought to take some pride in. However, it also presents some real, practical problems. First, there is absolutely no way for anyone to keep up with all the new information that is being generated. Things are just changing too fast. Second, how in the world do you find and retrieve the information you need? These are practical questions you'll have to contend with as you work towards your capstone project this semester. However, these are also issues you'll be faced with repeatedly throughout your careers. Fortunately, we have some incredibly powerful tools that help us manage information overload and to help us find what we need. One of the most important of these is the humble abstract. Now, abstracts are just short summaries of anything, really. Most often, though, we think of abstracts as summaries of published journal articles. Now, abstract is kind of a funny name for a summary. When we usually think of the word abstract, we think of schools of art or things of the imagination, not things of the real world. However, there's an older meaning of abstract, and that is to distill something down to its essence. And that's exactly what an abstract of a journal article does. It gives you not just a short synopsis, but rather a summary of all the essential details. To help you understand the power of an abstract, I'm going to take us through a hypothetical example. For the sake of argument, say you are working as a medical professional and a patient of yours comes into the office excited because they've heard great things about all the health benefits of turmeric. They've even printed out an article for you to read. They want to know what your opinion is. In particular, they want to know if cooking with more turmeric would help their aging grandmother who is in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Now, you remember that turmeric was in the news a while back, and you remember seeing some article headlines touting its health benefits, but you want to give your patient the best information possible. You also have a practice to run full of professional obligations, other patients, paperwork, payroll, not to mention a family who needs your attention. How then can you bring yourself up to speed quickly while still managing all the other things competing for your time? Well, let's find out. Okay, so here we see the article that your patient brought to you, 5 ways to use turmeric, the golden spice with immense health benefits. Now, a couple of things stand out to us that we should think about right away. One, what is the source of this article? Well, you can see that it comes from Times Now, timesnownews.com. It's not a scientific source, and we talked before about epistemology and how different people come to their understanding of the world. Your patient here has brought you something that they trust, or at least trust enough to bring it to your attention. And so we see here that it's a non-academic source, a non-scientific source. It makes a claim that it's one of the most versatile spices. Probably hard to argue with that. It is one of the most popular spices that can be added to your meals in different ways. Well, looks like this is based out of India, and certainly turmeric is a key spice in Indian cuisine, and pretty tasty in any event. Research has shown that the humble spice can offer major health benefits. It's a positive claim, but no real description of that research. We don't know what research they're referring to, how it's talked about. Here are some amazing health benefits of turmeric and ways to include it in your diet. And so nothing about this article screams something that we would trust as medical professionals, as scientists, as scholars. And indeed, as we read along, we find that this is just a bunch of positive claims. It has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. It may help improve liver function. It may it may help prevent certain cancers, it may prevent or treat Alzheimer's disease. Now, that's the claim that your patient was bringing to you that really sparked their interest in the spice. And so there's nothing in this article that really allows you as a medical professional or as a scholar to really offer competent advice. And so we need to go and look and see if there's anything behind these claims, and to do that we need to go with sources that we trust as professionals, using our epistemology, the way we know what we know. And so let's go over here, let's open up a new tab, and let's go to library.tamu.edu. So this takes us to the homepage of the libraries. And what we really want is we want to go to databases. Now, if you just type in something here, it will search for stuff in the library. It may search for stuff on the web. It's not very discriminating how that search bar works. So what we want to do is actually go to a database. Here we are. And here we can search all the databases that are available through the library. You can type that name in. You can go by, if you know the name of it, you can go by the first letter. And then it also has a list of popular databases. I posted a PowerPoint that was provided by the library that talked about how to use Medline, Ovid, and it talked about some others too. I'd like to introduce you to one that they mentioned but didn't really go into, which is Web of Science. It's one of my favorites. It's really useful, especially for your capstone project. So we'll click on the Web of Science link. And here we are at Web of Science. Now, you may have to log in using your TAMU ID if you're working from home. I was already logged in, so I got to skip that step. One thing it says is to select a database, and it may be a bit confusing because you selected a database, Web of Science, but Web of Science has multiple collections, and each of these targets a different set of journals. What comes up as default is the Web of Science core collection, which is fine, but I like to cast a wider net, and so I always just automatically come in here and search all databases. And so that's all of the collections that are accessible through Web of Science. And so I'm just going to type in Alzheimer's. and hit the search button. And here we see that we get 143,270 references that come up with just the keyword Alzheimer's. And that probably shouldn't be surprising. This is a hot area of research and has been for many years, and so it's not at all surprising that it should pull up a lot of things. And it would take you a very, very long time, of course, to search through all of these to see which reference might be useful to you. Here the titles, though, can be a bit helpful. So design, synthesis, in vitro, and in vivo evaluation of this drug. That's probably not what you're after. You were looking for turmeric. Amyloid beta peptide neurotoxicity in human neuronal cells, not what you're looking for. Chimera RNA, not what you're looking for. Now, I bring up those examples because it gives us some sense of why scientific titles are so incredibly dull. You're never going to find a science journal with, a title as catchy as The Hunger Games or A Tale of Two Cities or Game of Thrones. It's just not going to happen because that's not their purpose. The purpose of a title in scientific journals is to help you locate the information that looks promising, the information that you are looking for, that needle in a haystack. So, obviously, we're not going to read every title, 143,270 titles. That would be ridiculous. So we can go and refine our results here. And so we can go in and say, okay, so these are all of the articles that come up with Alzheimer's. Let's see what happens when we talk about turmeric. And we'll just go ahead and hit enter and see what comes up. So we went from over 100,000 references to just 140. That's a much more manageable number of articles to go through. It's a much more manageable number of things to sift through. So here again, we can look at the titles, specific interactions between tau protein and curcumin derivatives, molecular docking, and ab initio molecular orbital simulations. Again, notice how scientific titles are so detailed. They actually give you a super distillation of what that paper is about. But and here we see bidirectional interactions between curcumin and gut microbiota in transgenic mice with Alzheimer's disease. Role of phytochemicals as nutraceuticals for cognitive functions affected in aging might be handy. But again, you're a busy medical professional at this point. 140 references is certainly better than what we had before, but it's still a ridiculous number. You're not going to have time to go through all of those and see which ones are relevant to what your patient is asking. So your patient was asking about the use of turmeric as a possible treatment for Alzheimer's disease for her grandmother. So let's just see if we refine these results further to treatment and see what we come up with. Okay, so we're down to 61 results. That's still a lot to go through, and you certainly wouldn't want to read 61 papers, but we're getting to a point where we can scroll through the list and make some decisions about what papers look promising based on those descriptive titles. You could probably refine this a little bit more, but let's just go ahead and kind of skim through some of this. Let's see. Novel synthetic curcuminoids, probably not something you're interested in. And anti-inflammatory effects of curcumin in microglial cells, probably not what you're looking for either. One thing to note here is that by default, Web of Science will only show 10 results per page, which I find a bit obnoxious, and so I'll usually go to as many as I can. There we go. And so let's see, we were at 10, there we are. Curcumin treatment prevents cognitive deficit and alteration of neuronal morphology in the limbic system of aging rats. Let's just take a look at that one. Again, I don't want to necessarily read this entire paper. My patient isn't a rat, but maybe this is, cognitive deficit is certainly a part of Alzheimer's disease, and so I can look at this and see if it's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. Now, some information that comes up here, it tells you that this is in the journal Synapse, volume 71, issue 3, article number, this is just a designation, and this is published in March 2017, so this is a few years old at this point. not the most current one, but it might have some interesting information, and it certainly looks more promising than some of the other things that we've seen so far. If you want and need to download the paper, then you should use this full text from publisher or find text at TANU link. You should never have to pay for any of the articles that you come across, and oftentimes if you look for articles using Google Scholar or some other source or just a simple Google search, when you go to actually download that article, it will sit there and put up a paywall and say that you need to pay $40 for that article or up to $120 for that article, I think is the highest paid wall that I've seen. All of that is paid for through Texas A&M. So another advantage of going through A&M's databases is that you can get those articles for free. Now, here's this little link here that says View Abstract. I said that we have tools that are powerful ways for us to find information that we're looking for. And so I can just look at I can just click the abstract button. And there it is. So it would take me forever to read all of these articles, but it doesn't take me long to read a short paragraph. So let's just kind of quickly go through this together. In the primer I had you read about how to write an abstract, it said that the first thing should provide some background information. And so let's see if that's what these authors have done here. Curcuma is a natural compound that has shown neuroprotective properties and has been reported to prevent aging and improve memory. While the mechanisms underlying these effects are unclear, they may be related to increases in neuroplasticity. Morphological changes have been reported in neuronal dendrites in the limbic system in animals and elderly humans with cognitive impairment. In this regard, there is a need to use alternative therapies that delay the onset of morphologies and behavioral characteristics of aging. That's actually a little bit longer than what I would normally recommend for an introduction to an abstract, but I think they've done a pretty good job here. We know right away what this is about, and importantly, we know what the sort of unknown is. What are the major issues that this research is trying to address? Now, in the primer, I said the next thing that the abstract should cover is the objective, and here the authors have been very explicit. Therefore, the objective of this study was to evaluate the effect of curcuma on cognitive processes and dendritic morphology of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. They give the abbreviation. Notice how we've given the word first, and then we've defined the abbreviation in the parentheses. The CA1 and CA3 regions of the dorsal hippocampus, the dentate gyrus, and the basolateral amygdala, BLA, of aged rats. And there we go. We know exactly what they were studying. They wanted to evaluate what the effects of curcumin is on these specific areas of the brain. Now, the next part of the abstract should be the methods. Well, 18-month-old rats were administered curcuma at this concentration daily for 60 days. After treatment, recognition memory was assessed using the Novel Object Recognition Test. It's not telling us how the test was done, it's just giving us the name of the test, and people who are researchers in this field know what that test is. Curcuma-treated rats showed a significant increase in the exploration quotient. Okay, so we've just switched from the methods, which is just a very brief description about how much curcuma was administered for how many days and what tests were run. And now we're already getting into the results. So they had a significant increase in the exploration quotient. Dendritic morphology was assessed by Golgi-Cox staining and followed by Scholl analysis, and that showed a significant increase in dendritic spine density and dendritic length in pyramidal neurons of these areas that they said they were going to be looking at. The preservation of dendritic morphology was positively correlated with cognitive improvements. Okay, now our results suggest everything that was before this were just facts, and that's what the results section of an abstract should be, is just what are the facts. Your conclusions, by contrast, are what those facts mean. How do we interpret those facts? Facts are kind of inarguable, right? Your team won or lost last week. Why did they win or lose? That's where the conclusions comes in. The conclusions are your interpretations of those facts, what you think they mean, and they could be argued by other researchers. So our results suggest that curcuma induces modification of dendritic morphology in the aforementioned regions. These changes may explain how curcuma slows the aging process that has already begun in these animals, preventing deterioration in neuronal morphology of the limbic system and recognition memory. And so there we have it, the classic style of an abstract. We've got a background, we've got objectives, methods, results, and conclusions. So that's kind of the model that you'll be trying to create for your first assignment in VIBS 310. But this doesn't tell us anything about whether this is an effective treatment or not for patients, right? Certainly not for human patients. It just says that they've had these promising results in rats, and you aren't treating rats. Plus, we have the problem that this was published a little while back, and so where does the research stand now? Well, notice over here that Web of Science tells us how many times an article has been cited. So this one's been cited 14 times since it was published. If I click on that, it will pull up all of the articles that mention this one. So here we are, 14 articles cited that one that we just read the abstract for. And again, we can use those titles to help us find exactly what it is that we're looking for. And so here we can just use the titles to rapidly see if any of these are relevant to answering our patient's question. Bexarotene treatment increases dendritic length in the nucleus accumbens. That doesn't sound promising at all, does it? Well, let's go down to the next one. The effect of curcumin on cognition in Alzheimer's disease and healthy aging, a systematic review of preclinical and clinical studies. Eureka, that's exactly what we need, right? Here we have an article that's going to tell us where the scientific community stands right now on curcumin, turmeric, and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So we can easily view the abstract to see if it really is as promising as it suggests. And here we are. Alzheimer's disease constitutes a growing cause of cognitive impairment. Given that current treatments don't produce the desired therapeutic effects, we need to find alternatives. And here we are. Yeah, this looks like it's going to be exactly what we need. And I don't have to read an entire article to see if it's going to be useful or not. I know right away from the abstract that this is an article that I want. And so I would go and get that full free text from Publisher, click on it right there, and here we go. We have the article. We can read it right here as an HTML file, or we can download it as a PDF. Now, from a practical standpoint, there's often not much difference between those two. I tend to go with downloading the PDFs though, because sometimes the HTML versions don't have all of the information you need to properly reference the article, whereas the PDF will. But it's really up to you. Either way works just fine. So hopefully going through this example gives you a sense of some of the tools that are available to us and what role both titles and abstracts play in helping us find the information we're looking for. I hope too that this has given you some sense of the structure of abstracts, something that you'll be working on for your first writing assignment in VIBS 310.